Imagine being 30, broke, and staring at a mailbox empty for weeks, wondering if anyone, anywhere, would ever believe in you. The Great Depression was swallowing dreams like sand in a storm, yet here you were, holding nothing but an idea and a stack of handwritten letters. That was the life of John Leo Blair, a man whose name few would recognize today, yet whose innovations quietly touched millions of homes, all without a single store to his name. Born in 1888 in the heart of rural Pennsylvania, Blair was the kind of kid who didn't just tinker with things, he lived inside them. If a clock broke, he didn't just fix it. He dissected it, questioned its purpose, and imagined a better version. By his 20s, he had built a reputation for ingenuity, but innovation alone does not pay rent. When the stock market collapsed in 1929, even sharp minds felt the sting. Jobs vanished, factories shuttered, and optimism became a rare currency. Yet John, with his modest upbringing and an unshakable belief in his ideas, refused to fold. Picture him sitting at a small wooden desk in his tiny apartment, the lamp flickering against stacks of letters and sketches of products he dreamt of selling. He didn't have a storefront. He didn't have a flashy brand. All he had was a vision to reach people directly, to bypass the middleman, and to create products that solved everyday problems. Yet even in this quiet apartment, the pressure was suffocating. Creditors knocked and doubts gnawed at him like relentless winter winds. Could he really sell millions without ever opening a single store? Could anyone? And then there were the nights he cried, not out of defeat, but out of sheer exhaustion and the terror of risking everything. He had no safety net. The world was screaming that he should give up, get a job, join the masses. But something inside him, a quiet, stubborn flame, refused to die. So here's the question. If life had cornered you like it cornered John Leo Blair, would you have had the courage to continue? To trust that your ideas, your relentless obsession with solving small but vital problems, could reach people even when the world told you they wouldn't? Because what John was about to do next would not just defy the odds, it would quietly rewrite the rules of commerce in America. But before that breakthrough, he had to survive the storm that nearly crushed him. The 1930s were merciless, and John Leo Blair felt every bite of it. Imagine walking the streets of small Pennsylvania towns, rain soaking your coat, pockets empty, and hearing neighbors whisper about who had lost everything this week. Factories had shut, savings vanished, and even the strongest of men bowed under the weight of despair. Blair wasn't just fighting the economy, he was battling the skepticism of a world that refused to see potential in a man with no storefront, no flashy brand, only ideas, and a relentless will. He tried selling small inventions, gadgets he'd poured months into designing. He crafted clever household solutions, clever hooks that saved space, tools that simplified chores. Each one, in his mind, was destined to make life better. But when he sent letters and prototypes to stores, he was met with polite rejection or worse, complete silence. Sometimes the reply would be a single, curt sentence. Not interested. Other times, no reply at all. He felt invisible, like his efforts were being swallowed by the darkness of the depression. Picture him at night, hunched over his workbench, hands rough from relentless tinkering. The room smelled of metal and ink, his fingers smudged with graphite sketches of products that could have changed everyday lives. He'd test, adjust, refine, over and over, without a single buyer knocking at the door. And yet, the desperation didn't make him quit. It only sharpened his focus. Every rejection was a lesson. Every empty mailbox a challenge to push harder. But it wasn't just the market that tested him. His own family, loving but anxious, questioned his sanity. "Why don't you get a real job?" they asked. "Why chase dreams when we can't even afford dinner?" Those words cut deeper than any failure. Doubt seeped into his mind, whispering, "Maybe they're right. Maybe your ideas aren't enough." Yet in those quiet, lonely hours, a small voice inside him refused to surrender. He realized something the world hadn't yet learned. You don't need a store to sell something. You don't need crowds or displays. People respond to clarity, to convenience, and to products that solve real problems. And if you could reach them directly, if you could bypass the noise and connect straight to the hearts of households, the impossible might just become possible. By the time 1932 rolled around, John had developed a radical strategy, one that would risk everything he had left, his money, his reputation, even his sanity. But it was the only way forward. And as he stared at the flickering light of his desk lamp, surrounded by stacks of prototypes and letters, he whispered to himself, "They will see. They will have to see." The storm of failure was far from over, but a spark had been lit. And the next step, the bold, reckless move, would either catapult him into history or bury him forever. Even in the depths of the depression, there are moments that flicker like fragile candles in a storm. For John Leo Blair, these came quietly, almost imperceptibly, but they were enough to pull him forward. Imagine receiving your first order, not from a store, not from a distributor, but directly from a stranger who had seen your product and believed in it. That was Blair's first taste of vindication. One small household tool, mailed to a mother in Ohio, arrived at her doorstep and, according to her letter, changed the way I manage my kitchen forever. Simple words. Tiny victory. But for Blair, it felt like thunder. He began experimenting with mail order. It wasn't glamorous. He spent hours writing letters by hand, packaging each item himself, and learning how to convince someone to buy from a man they had never met. The first 100 sales came in trickles. Sometimes the post office would return letters unopened, stamps smeared by rain. Sometimes packages were lost, crushed in transit. He even considered quitting. Every morning he battled the gnawing question, am I wasting my life on something nobody wants? But then came another letter, another order, and another. Each one, no matter how small, carried a lesson. He learned to perfect the language in his letters, to tell stories that made strangers care about his products, to frame everyday problems in ways that made his solutions irresistible. Slowly, a pattern emerged. People didn't just want the tools, people wanted the promise of easier lives, of clever solutions, of innovation delivered straight to their doorstep. Picture Blair late at night, hunched over stacks of letters, candlelight flickering, pens scratching furiously. Outside, the city slept in despair, but inside that tiny room, hope was burning like wildfire. He was no longer just tinkering. He was learning the art of human psychology, of trust, of connection. Each small success wasn't just a sale, it was proof that his instincts were right, that the world could be reached without a store, without flashy displays, just through perseverance, clever writing, and understanding what people truly needed. Yet the victories were fragile. Every order fulfilled was a battle against exhaustion, every satisfied customer a small miracle. Blair was pouring his soul into a venture that could collapse overnight. And it almost did. There were moments when the weight of risk pressed down on him so heavily he could barely breathe. But those small victories, like sparks in a dark cave, were enough to keep him moving towards something bigger, something daring, something that could change his life forever. And that moment was coming. The move that would either make him a legend or crush him entirely. By the mid-1930s, John Leo Blair was no stranger to exhaustion. Imagine juggling dozens of orders at once, packaging items in a cramped apartment, stamping envelopes until your fingers cracked, while the world outside whispered that you were chasing a fool's dream. The weight of survival pressed down on him, yet each day offered the tiniest spark of hope, an extra order, a thank you letter, a repeat customer. These small victories were the fragile threads holding him together, threads that he clutched with white-knuckled determination. Blair had no store, no flashy marketing team, no distribution network. Just him, a desk, and the belief that ingenuity could conquer circumstance. And yet, the failures piled up relentlessly. Orders sometimes arrived late. Packages broke. Letters went unanswered. Sometimes he'd pour a week of work into a product only to have it return as defective or undesired. Each setback carved deeper into his confidence. Each mistake echoed in the silence of his apartment, making him question every decision. Picture a rainy evening in 1934. Blair sits at his workbench, shoulders slumped, staring at a pile of returned items. Outside, the city is muted under grey clouds. The post office bell jingles, another return, another note of disappointment. And yet, in the corner, a small stack of letters glimmers like beacons. Customers raving about how a simple tool had transformed their daily life. One letter reads, "Your product may be small, but it makes a big difference in my home. Thank you." That tiny affirmation, almost invisible to the world, fuels him more than any paycheck ever could. Every evening, Blair scribbled new ideas, refined designs, and drafted letters that read like personal conversations rather than sales pitches. He began to notice a pattern in what people truly wanted: convenience, efficiency, reliability, and a touch of cleverness. He started packaging his products with care, adding handwritten notes, creating an emotional connection before the customer even held the item. It wasn't just commerce, it was storytelling. And slowly, those stories were spreading. One household at a time, but pressure never eased. Creditors were relentless. His health was strained. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Failure could come at any moment. And yet, even in the face of exhaustion and near collapse, Blair began to glimpse the contours of something larger. The groundwork of a bold, daring move that could turn months of struggle into a business empire. It was risky, perhaps reckless, but in his mind, it was the only way forward. And just as the storm clouds seemed to gather thickest, a moment arrived that demanded courage unlike anything he had faced before, a gamble that could either cement his place in history or erase everything he had fought for. It was 1935, and John Leo Blair had reached the edge. Imagine standing on a cliff, wind tearing at your coat, looking down into a swirling abyss of debt, exhaustion, and doubt. Every instinct screamed to step back, to surrender, to find a safer path. But Blair didn't. He had discovered something revolutionary, a way to sell directly to households, bypassing stores, middlemen, and the crushing limitations of the Depression-era marketplace. It was risky, unheard of, crazy, but it was the only chance he had. He decided to launch a mail-order business on a scale few could imagine. He poured every last dollar he owned into printing catalogs, creating compelling product descriptions, and refining prototypes until they felt perfect to the touch. Each word, each photograph, each package was designed to speak directly to the heart of the customer. He wasn't just selling tools or gadgets. He was selling a promise that life could be a little easier, a little better, even in the midst of economic despair. Imagine Blair at the printing press, sleeves rolled up, ink smudged across his palms. The machines roared around him, shaking the small room. Each sheet of catalogue that came off the press was more than paper. It was hope, audacity, and faith in the impossible. Friends and family watched, shaking their heads. "You'll lose everything," they warned. But Blair only smiled. Inside him, a quiet voice whispered, "This is how it's done. This is how history will remember the bold." The first batch of catalogues went out, addressed to strangers across the country. He waited, tense, pacing his small apartment, staring at the mailbox like it held the answers to life itself. Days passed. Anxiety clawed at him. And then the first orders began to arrive. 1, 2, 10, then dozens. Each envelope, each check, was a validation of everything he had risked. The gamble had worked, but only because he had combined creativity with a deep understanding of human desire, persistence in the face of doubt, and a willingness to bet everything he had on an idea no one else believed in. And yet, the risk was far from over. A single mistake, a broken shipment, a misprinted catalogue, a dissatisfied customer could undo everything. But John Leo Blair's boldness, his intuition, and his relentless pursuit of excellence kept him ahead. He had learned that true risk isn't reckless. It's calculated, focused, and fueled by an unshakable belief in one's vision. This moment marked the turning point. The storm of failure had not vanished, but it now collided with a force stronger than despair. Action. And action, as Blair was about to show, could reshape destiny in ways that fear could never imagine. Once the first catalogues began generating orders, John Leo Blair felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had known. Imagine a man who had spent years scraping by, suddenly seeing his idea leap off the page and into thousands of homes across America. Letters flooded in, checks arrived in neat stacks, and for the first time, Blair could feel the weight of possibility instead of despair. Every rejection he had faced, every returned package, every sleepless night, all of it coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. His vision worked. But success didn't come gently. With the flood of orders came chaos. Packages needed packing, letters needed writing, customer questions demanded answers, and his tiny apartment suddenly resembled a storm's aftermath. He worked relentlessly, sometimes 16 hours a day, hands raw, eyes strained, yet each satisfied customer fueled him further. The letters were filled with gratitude, amazement, even awe. People were discovering, through his products, a small spark of joy and convenience in their everyday lives. And with every note of praise, Blair's confidence grew. But so did his ambition. Imagine him pacing in that small, dimly lit room, surrounded by stacks of orders and a flickering lamp. A smile breaking across his exhausted face. He realized that this wasn't just a business, it was a movement. He had tapped into something powerful, the direct connection between creator and customer, bypassing the traditional retail chains that had dominated commerce for decades. And this was before anyone else even imagined the potential of mail order on such a scale. Yet even as momentum built, Blair never let himself be lulled into complacency. He knew that the next step required more than just work. It required psychology, storytelling, and a near-obsessive understanding of human behavior. Each catalogue was not simply a sales tool. It was a carefully crafted narrative designed to captivate, persuade, and inspire. Every word, every image, every testimonial was chosen to create trust, to spark desire, and to make the recipient feel seen and understood. By 1937, what had started as a desperate gamble had become a well-oiled operation reaching millions of Americans. Orders multiplied, and Blair's methods, once questioned, became a blueprint for success. Yet beneath the surface of triumph, there remained the ever-present tension, the fear of failure, the exhaustion, the relentless pressure of delivering perfection. Every day demanded focus, every mistake carried risk. But Blair had learned that fortune favors those who dare, who persist, and who refuse to let fear dictate their destiny. And in this relentless push forward, a deeper realization took root. Success was not merely about sales, it was about trust, connection, and the courage to act when everyone else hesitated. He had built a bridge from obscurity to influence, but the journey was far from over. The world was watching, and soon the full magnitude of his vision would unfold in ways even he had not yet imagined. By the late 1930s, John Leo Blair was no longer just surviving. He was shaping the way Americans bought products, quietly rewriting the rules of commerce without ever opening a store. But the real story wasn't the millions of sales or the flood of orders. It was the mindset that carried him there. Imagine a man who had stared into the abyss of poverty, rejection, and despair, yet each setback became fuel for his drive rather than an anchor dragging him down. That was Blair's secret. He refused to see failure as the end. He saw it as instruction. Every returned package, every critical letter, every sleepless night became part of a blueprint. He dissected them, learned from them, and refined his approach. Imagine sitting at a small desk late at night, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking from exhaustion, yet feeling an almost meditative clarity. Blair understood something profound. The human mind responds to care, detail, and authenticity. People weren't just buying tools, they were buying confidence in the person behind them. And that insight allowed him to scale beyond anything his initial imagination could have foreseen. He also cultivated an almost obsessive discipline. Each day was regimented, every hour accounted for. While others slept or wasted energy worrying, Blair honed his craft, perfecting letters, testing products, and analyzing customer feedback. He became a master observer of human behavior. He could sense hesitation in a sentence, doubt in a signature, desire in a compliment, and he learned to meet that psychology with precision, crafting experiences that made ordinary people trust him completely, sometimes without even meeting him in person. But perhaps the most powerful part of Blair's mindset was resilience. He had faced countless moments when giving up seemed rational. He had stared at empty mailboxes, returned products, and skeptical relatives, and yet he trained his mind to see possibilities where others saw dead ends. Every challenge was reframed as a puzzle. Every failure became data, and slowly, the accumulation of relentless effort, emotional intelligence, and strategic insight transformed a small, nearly invisible operation into a nationwide phenomenon. By the early 1940s, Blair wasn't just selling products. He was creating an entire ecosystem of trust, direct connection, and efficiency that would inspire generations of entrepreneurs. But the most important lesson wasn't in the numbers, it was in the psychology of persistence, courage, and vision. The man who had once sat alone in a dim apartment, wondering if anyone would ever care, had transformed doubt into authority, scarcity into abundance, and fear into action. And as his influence quietly expanded, one truth became undeniable. The empire of John Leo Blair wasn't built merely on products. It was built on the unshakable mindset of a man who refused to let the world define his limits. By the time the 1940s fully arrived, John Leo Blair had achieved something extraordinary. Millions of households across America had received his products, not through flashy stores or extravagant marketing, but through sheer persistence, ingenuity, and an almost spiritual understanding of human psychology. Imagine a man who started with nothing, no capital, no storefront, no connections, becoming a silent force that transformed the way people shopped, lived, and trusted new ideas. It wasn't luck. It was courage in action. Blair's story is more than historical trivia. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever faced the crushing weight of doubt, failure, or financial uncertainty. He teaches us that the path to success is not a straight line. It is forged through relentless experimentation, small wins that build confidence, and the audacity to act when the world says no. He didn't merely survive the Depression. He redefined possibility in a time when hope itself was scarce. Picture Blair, years later, reflecting on his journey. His hands, once rough from packing letters and assembling tools, are steadier now, yet the fire in his eyes remains. The failures of the past are not regrets. They are the scaffolding that held his empire together. Each letter returned, each skeptical response, each sleepless night contributed to a structure of success built on resilience, intelligence, and daring. And the world had taken notice, not with headlines, but with millions of ordinary Americans quietly benefiting from the brilliance of a man who refused to quit. The lesson is clear. Success rarely comes from following the rules. It comes from understanding people, taking calculated risks, and refusing to let fear dictate action. Blair's genius wasn't in inventing a single product. It was in mastering the delicate dance of trust, timing, and human psychology. He sold millions without a store because he understood something far more valuable than retail space. He understood connection. So here's the question for you. If life tested you the way it tested John Leo Blair, would you have kept fighting? Would you have dared to risk everything on an idea when the world was telling you it couldn't be done? Would you have trusted your own insight even when no one else did? Tell me in the comments. Would you have taken that leap? Would you have sent that first letter, trusted that first stranger, and believed in your vision when everything around you screamed stop? Because the legacy of John Leo Blair isn't just a story of mail-order success, it's a lesson in courage, strategy, and the kind of relentless, fearless thinking that changes history.